On today's show, we're focusing on an entity that can't really be defined by a single name or category. All over the world, hundreds of people claim to have encounters with this strange creature each year, but yet no one can claim with any certainty what this monstrosity actually is or where it comes from. Because of this, it has been labeled as many different things over the years, and many people have resigned themselves to the belief that this creature may not be connected to any other type of cryptid or entity at all, which makes this bizarre humanoid all the more terrifying. So today, I'd like to take you on a journey down a dark and less traveled path as we examine the legends and eyewitness encounters involving the creatures now known as pale crawlers.
The first time it happened, I was sleeping and woke up because I felt a hand on my leg and I realized that I couldn't move.
And he come across this object on the ground, which was the shape of a flying saucer. So he jumped out of his pickup and went down there, and there was 4 beings laying on the ground.
When I raised my head back up, I was turning my head, and out of my peripheral vision, I seen something hop to a tree. And it was tall, about 7-8 foot tall, and it was black, real hairy, like a gorilla.
Welcome to the Paranormal Mysteries Podcast, and thank you for being here. I am your host, Nick Ryan. You may be asking yourself, what is a pale crawler? And to be honest, you wouldn't be alone. As I said before, this entity has been called many things over the years, which has only added to an already confusing phenomenon. Throughout history, people have told stories of having odd encounters with pale humanoid creatures, but in 2005, something happened that brought this particular entity into the spotlight. On a message board called 4chan, a group of people decided to bring a fictional creature into existence, when one of them suggested that they work together to create a new monster. This new monster was called the Rake. The Rake's invention is so well documented that we even have some notes of the creature's creation. For example, we know that the group originally toyed with different names for their new monster, which included the name Operation Crawler. The entity was described as humanoid in appearance, about 6 feet tall when standing, but usually crouches, and walks on all fours. It has very pale skin, and the face is blank, with no nose and no mouth. However, it has 3 solid green eyes, one in the middle of its forehead, and the other 2 on either side of its head, towards the back. Usually seen in front yards in suburban areas, the creature usually watches the observer, but will stand up and attack if approached. When it attacks, a mouth opens up as if hinged at the jaw, revealing many tiny but dull teeth. As time went on, the monstrosity began to resemble what we now know today as the Rake. The fictional story began slowly spreading across the internet and began circulating on a site called LiveJournal, which is another online message board, and eventually returned to 4chan in the section dedicated to the paranormal. By December 2010, a Tumblr account was created in order to document sightings of the Rake, and though it appears that the founder of that blog was aware that the Rake was fictional, not all of the readers were. Stories of the Rake continued to be shared, eventually making their way into more mainstream horror communities like creepypasta and unexplained mysteries, both which are websites dedicated to sharing horror stories and digital urban legends. Even to this day, you can still find stories of people that swear that they too have had a sighting or an encounter with the Rake, some of which can be found on the Humanoid Encounters Reddit community. So, if the Rake is indeed a fictional monster, then why am I discussing it? Well, first of all, it's important to understand where myths and legends originate from, and it's even more important to be able to separate honest paranormal experiences from fabricated ones. And even though the Rake is a decidedly made-up creature, it seems to have alerted the paranormal community to what some believe is a very real phenomenon. I believe that people still refer to these sightings as Rake encounters because there really isn't a definitive category or name for this creature. Because of this, many people have started using the term pale crawlers in order to describe the many different types of sightings that are being reported. So with all that being said, we're still left with the question of what is a pale crawler exactly, and to be quite honest, no one really knows. In general, much like the Rake, pale crawlers are described as very tall, extremely thin, and you guessed it, pale or gray humanoid creatures that are most commonly reported as being hunched over or crawling close to the ground. Many times, eyewitnesses claim that the creature's arms and legs appear to be much longer than any humans, with many people stating that the hands and sometimes even the feet consist of sharp claws. The face of pale crawlers are said to be no less hideous, with descriptions ranging from gray, gaunt, alien-like features to small beady eyes and large gaping mouths, holding rows of sharp teeth. But as outrageous and implausible as this entity may seem, what interests me are its similarities to other more well-known creatures from ancient folklore and myth, such as the ghoul, which originated in pre-Islamic Arabian religion. Such creatures were described in very similar ways to today's pale crawlers, or rake-like humanoids, and were said to be found primarily in graveyards, where they were said to seek out human flesh. Others believe that pale crawlers fall more in line with what many First Nations call the Wendigo, which is described as a monster with some characteristics of a human, or as a spirit who has possessed a human being and made them become monstrous. Its influence is said to invoke acts of murder, insatiable greed, and even cannibalism. Although descriptions may vary, most cultures describe the Wendigo as a malevolent, supernatural being that is associated with winter, the north, coldness, famine, and starvation. Another mysterious entity that is sometimes placed under the heading of pale crawlers are what are more commonly known as the Fresno alien, or Fresno nightcrawlers. These odd beings are usually described as nothing more than a pair of pale white legs or even an upside-down U or V with no discernible head. Some of these sightings have involved multiple entities, and they are typically seen walking through an area and sometimes standing and swaying in a hypnotic fashion. But as strange as these particular entities are, I don't believe that they fit within the same parameters of standard pale crawler descriptions. So for today's episode, I won't be talking about them in depth. Instead, I'd like to share some eyewitness stories involving these bizarre humanoids, and I'm going to begin with an article on Mysterious Universe. It was the winter of 2016, and the witness was out feeding goats on a farm in Indiana at around 8 p.m., and when she finished, she started walking back, and she explains what happened next. After I had finished, I began to walk back. I had crossed one field and was about halfway through the narrow path when I started to hear rustling in the underbrush. All I had with me was a flashlight that only shined about 10 feet in front of me. I was almost to the end of the path when I spotted something. It was on all fours, with a bony frame, elongated limbs, and pale skin. While the first part of that description sounds pretty generic, it did seem to have a long and highly flexible neck. Not long after I noticed it noticed me, and bolted down the path. It ran, almost scuttling into the second field. This field had a small hill in the center, and this thing fled and disappeared over one side. I ran as fast as I could around to the other side of the small hill, and zigzagged back to my house, where I quickly locked all of my doors. This thing was terrifying, but it seemed watchful more than anything, for now. In another account from Indiana, documented in the National Cryptid Society database, this is a case from Michigan City, Indiana, from 2012. The witness claims that she had been staying at the beach house of a friend by Lake Michigan, and that there had been a lightning storm at the time. At around 2 a.m., some of them went outside to smoke and watch the lightning, and that was when they noticed the beam of a flashlight scanning the tall grass by the shore nearby, as if searching for something. Thinking this to be a bit odd, The group of friends watched on and saw that the beam had captured an elongated, grayish humanoid-looking creature stretched out on the beach, and the witness would then say this: "The light sweeps by something in the grass, then it shines back onto it. What was illuminated was very strange. It appeared to be a naked guy crawling around on the grass, although it had elongated arms and legs. It was moving kind of fast and hunched over. It only lasted a few seconds, long enough for all of us to see it. Then, after the thing ran off, the flashlight shined directly at us. It stayed pointed at us until it went out a few seconds later. It was creepy. We asked what each other saw. We all saw a weird, stretched-out naked guy. The only explainable thing it could have possibly been was a drunk, gangly naked guy, but I don't think so, because it looked abnormally stretched. The light pointed at us, and it freaked everyone out. It was something strange. I can't say what the height of it was accurately, maybe around 7 feet tall. My husband said it looked like something from a Marilyn Manson music video. I wanted to go down there. I wanted to see if we could find it, but no one would go with me. They were creeped out and wanted to go back inside." There have been a few sightings of something similar and equally baffling around the town of Effingham in the state of Illinois. One case file of the National Cryptid Society is dated as 2010 and concerns a witness only known as Jade. The witness was allegedly out one night, headed for the supposedly haunted Casbar Cemetery out in the deep woods outside of Effingham, along with 2 friends. When they were out in the countryside at around 1 a.m. in the morning, something very curious congealed out of the night, and the witness would say this: "I see something with yellow glowing eyes off the side of the country road, just past the ditch, in the headlights. Too short to be a deer, but too big to be a possum or raccoon. As we get closer, it gets clearer, and I realize what I'm looking at is skinny, hairless, and gray, human-like, but definitely not human. It was crouched down. Its arms were incredibly long, and looked like it could have been 7 feet tall or bigger, standing. I can feel myself get cold, and my heart race, and my hair stand up on the back of my neck. Complete shock and terror set in, and I can't make a sound. I'm just staring at it. By the time we are right in front of it, passing it, and it just watches us drive by. It slinks into the dark. Then we all just start screaming, literally freaking the hell out. I was convinced it was a demon for months, but still doubted myself even seeing it, thinking that my mind was playing tricks on me. We didn't even make it to the Casbar that night. We went straight home. I couldn't sleep that night." The witness went on to become convinced that what she had seen was a ghoul, or an entity that lurks around, feeding on the dead. She would then say this: "They feed on the freshly dead, and normally they stay close to cemeteries to be close to food. They have been known to show themselves to humans when trying to get close to them to eat in times where fresh deceased bodies are scarce. I searched for images of them and could only find illustrations, but they look exactly like what I saw that night. Everything I was reading was falling perfectly in place and lined up perfectly with my experience. I could not explain it away." Also in the state of Illinois is a case from the town of Rossville in 2010. The setting was at a cemetery, and the time was just after sunset. The witness and a friend were walking down the main lane through the cemetery when something fairly weird scuttled out of the night. The witness would say, "Something came running from the gate and just passed us on our left. My friend had laughed and asked if I had heard that, and I stopped walking and responded that no, I hadn't, but I had seen it. As the thing had passed between headstones, I caught a glimpse. It looked like a pale, emaciated humanoid that was running on all fours. It had no hair at all that I could see, and I did not get a look at the face. It was moving far faster than any person running on hands and feet should have been able to move. My friend and I just stayed frozen there and waited for another friend to come and get us, because we were too scared to move. It continued to circle us, as we could hear it moving around. It never seemed threatening. If anything, it seemed curious and scared of us, but who knows? I do know that it was not a coyote or a stray dog. I never saw the face, but I did see the head. It did not have a muzzle. There was no tail either. It definitely didn't have fur. It had pale, almost bluish skin, and I remember I could make out the ribs from where I was standing. Forgive me if this is a hot mess of a post, but I was up all night researching this thing, and when I did fall asleep, I did not sleep well. Other locations have had sightings as well, such as Ballard County in western Kentucky. As the witness was driving along the back roads on a gravel road one night around 2 a.m., he says that he caught something in his headlights that startled him to the core. He would say this: "I caught sight of something white and vaguely human crawling in the ditch. As we passed it, I hit the brakes, thinking it was a person who needed help. 'Are you crazy? Don't effing stop,' Blake screamed. I looked in the mirror and saw that it was standing up. Even though it was still in the ditch, it was as tall as the stop sign next to it. It took a step towards us, and I hit the gas. As we drove away, I saw in the mirror that it had dropped down to all fours and was now crawling after us. I didn't start pulling away from it till I got up to around 40 miles per hour. No matter how close I was to it, I never got a good look at it. It was fuzzy, like it was constantly out of focus. I'm not sure why, but something about it makes me think of it as male. Maybe the height? When it crawled, it moved like a lizard, with its hands and feet flat on the ground, elbows and knees up and out, body wiggling side to side. This happened when I was 22. I'm 40 now, and I've never seen that thing again. I've taken many a midnight cruise along those narrow roads, but I've never had the nerve to go near that particular farm road again. Call me a chicken, and I'll cluck happily." Another witness tells the story of an anonymous Reddit poster who says he had a very spooky encounter in 2006 in rural Arkansas. He claims that this happened when he was only 12 years old, and that he had lived in a modest house, nestled on an acre of land out in the boondocks, surrounded by dim woods, and its only connection to the outside world was an unpaved dirt road meandering off through the trees. Making the whole scene even spookier is the alleged fact that there was a big old abandoned slaughterhouse somewhere back in the wooded area, as well as the remnants of some burned-down house owned by anonymous parties long since gone. Whether this had anything to do with what was to come or not, the witness describes the whole area as rather mystical and special, as well as odd in general, and that his encounter would happen one evening when he went out to lie down on the outside trampoline after an argument with his parents. It was just him and that big sky with a full moon framed within it, and he reports what happened next. "So I'm laying on the trampoline, and other than the moon, there isn't any light aside from the porch light, which is a ways behind me. All of a sudden, I vaguely see something move. It's coming from the lot, across from the dirt road, and it's coming toward me. We had a Boston Terrier at the time, and at first I figured it was him, but as it got closer, I knew that it wasn't. It was sickly pale. It walked on all fours with its hands, but seemed to be able to walk upright. It's kind of galloping toward me on all fours, and it's a little bit a ways at this point, but getting closer. The light bounced off its skin, and it almost seemed to look wet. Its gait and color is pretty clear to me, but I don't remember anything distinct about its face, except that it just seems to be whitewashed to me. It's happening so fast, and now it's right near me, still running, and then I can't see it. It's under the trampoline, and then I feel it. I feel it push up on the trampoline. I didn't even bother to look back as I ran to the house. I don't remember my thought process at all past that point, but my mom has told me that I came in the house hollering and absolutely terrified. I've thought about this consistently over the years, and as I've gotten older, I have seen stories of similar creatures. I used to describe it as looking like Gollum from The Lord of the Rings. I think of the creature kind of fondly in a way. It would never have occurred to me at the time, but it almost had a playful vibe to it, and it makes me sad to think that it's just some lonely but semi-intelligent creature. Maybe a grotesque experiment or some off-kilter evolutionary line. I don't think that's impossible. I guess I like to let my imagination run wild with it though. I will always be curious about this, and the place in general. Another poster on Reddit gives his own freaky encounter, for which he even supplies photographic evidence. This supposedly happened in 2012 at an undisclosed location at a close-knit family barn community in a rural area of the United States, surrounded by dim woods, laced with small scenic trails. The witness says that his 2 horses were kept on the property, which was near his home, and which he would visit every day to care for and ride around through the peaceful scenery. One evening, though, he had a startling experience as he rode one of the horses, of which he would say this. One evening, around 5 p.m., I was sitting on her, letting her stand when she started snorting and backing up. I looked up and saw this white-gray creature crawling out of the woods towards us. It had a very small round head, and its eyes were just pits. It had a very small mouth, not much detail there. Its arms were very long and thin, fingers also like that. Its ribcage was very pronounced and defined, and its legs were very long and lanky. Its movements were very jerky, not smooth and fluid. It slowly jerked out to us when my horse turned and bolted out of the arena. She's a dead-broke, calm, well-mannered horse who was never spooked before. She would not go back into the arena that night. I walked her around the barnyard, staying near the main barn. I put her up and ran out to peek into the arena to find nothing except some footprints where I saw the thing. This would not be the end of the sightings of this odd creature, as the witness says it would lurk around the dark periphery of the property all through that summer, often peeking around the gate that led out into the woods. On one occasion, he saw it running along the other side of the fence, keeping up with him and the horse. It was eerie to be sure, and the witness continues. I continued seeing it, mainly in the woods, but it was always around. In summer of 2013, the barn shut down when the owner died. We moved the horse to a friend's place for the time being, and I didn't see it there. Late summer or fall of 2013, I found a new barn, with woods directly behind the barn and arena. This place had lights and was much newer. About a month later, when I was getting ready to leave, I heard something in the woods. I looked down the barn aisle into the woods and saw the creature running down the road into the woods. I saw it much less frequently for a while, until later in the fall of 2014, I began seeing it in the back pasture woods, as it darted in and out of the tree line. I saw a second one sitting in a neighbor's yard. It would sit in the same spot every day and watch me ride. I started taking pictures, which are very poor and crappy, and sent them to a friend who claimed that he and some others had also seen it. I kept seeing it occasionally, but from a much greater distance than at the first barn. I went with this barn owner to another farm to get some stuff when I saw a very, very large version of this creature run out of the woods, right behind a tree that I was 10 feet from, while I was alone by the trailer. Last November, I house sat for the barn owners. I went out around 2 a.m. to fill water troughs and enjoy the full moon and cool night. I was sitting in the back pasture when 3 of the creatures began coming from the woods. One came up to the trees near the trough where I was. The other 2 were walking along the tree line. The horses were silently munching their hay, pretty far from where the creatures were. I messaged the guy from earlier and told him what was going on. Since that incident, I haven't really seen them. Last summer, I did see one outside of my house, staring into the windows. A few weeks ago, one was outside of my bedroom windows, tapping and making a strange, faint, shrieking sound. Another Reddit poster gave his own report of a strange occurrence at a rural country house when he was 15 years old. At the time, he was apparently in his bedroom on a dark night and was about to close the blinds to the window when he caught a glimpse of a pure white, almost glowing man-thing glaring at him from next to a nearby pine tree. He would describe what happened as follows. It was crouched down, kind of in a Spider-Man pose, and I believe it had larger black eyes. Not like something you'd see from the Alien Greys, but it was a feature that stood out to me. It was very muscular. I distinctly remember seeing well-defined arm muscles. It seemed just very muscular in general. It wasn't too thin, It was just strong looking. I don't know how tall it was because it was crouched down, looking up at me. I don't remember if its head appeared larger than an average human's head, but I remember it was very bald. When I saw this creature, I screamed from my mom. She came to the window and saw something that startled her as well, and then she ran downstairs to our back porch and yelled, "Who's out there? Come out!" I remember standing behind my mother, nervous with fear. I went back to my room and looked out the window, and it was gone. I have this weird feeling that someday I'll see it again. I'm not sure why. I just feel it. A very similar report was posted on the National Cryptid Society and was given by a witness in the Midwest United States. And the witness says this: "When I was in 6th grade, I looked out of the living room window and saw a white reflection. My mom grabbed a flashlight and looked out of the window. She could see some white animal crawling around in the ground in the clearing by our house. It was approximately raccoon-sized, but it was white and apparently able to get 3 feet up to the window. The next morning before sunrise, I was letting my dog outside. He ran out to the garage door and began barking and growling, which was completely out of character for him. I stepped around the doorframe and saw an approximately 5-foot-tall, pale being with 2 huge glowing eyes and some form of round glowing item where a mouth or neck might be. I screamed, turned and ran back inside, leaving my mother and dog out to fend for themselves. By the time my mother figured out what had happened and I calmed down enough to come back out, the thing was gone. To this day, I'm terrified of the woods surrounding their house at night. When I visit, I leave before sunset, or I have somebody walk me to my car. It has been over 15 years. I would also like to add that I don't believe in aliens or ghosts or anything, but I have no clue what these things were. Besides hanging out in the shadows and woods of rural properties, similar pale humanoids have been encountered on roads as well, where the lane lines come flickering out of the gloom to go racing back into the night. In a report of the July 15th, 2016 episode of Coast to Coast AM, a caller named Nate gave his experience while driving along a desolate road in rural Illinois. He says that he is a truck driver, a profession that has numerous brushes with the paranormal, and on this night, he was heading east on I-80 through Illinois, and he would tell George Norrie the following: "I had stayed the night, the afternoon, in Des Moines to get some sleep, and I got a fresh 8 hours of sleep, and I had just got on the road. It was about dusk, and the sun was just about to set, and I was driving, and I saw a figure just ahead of me on I-80, and it was right on the side of the road. When I say it was right on the side of the road, I don't mean in the grass. Its toes were on the white line. I slowed down a little bit to kind of see what was going on there, and to maybe avoid it. When I got about 50 yards away from it, I got down to about 50 miles per hour, and I could see it clearly. I had my brights on and everything. It was a man. It looked like a man, maybe 5'9" or 5'10". Couldn't have been more than 100 pounds, soaking wet. And when I got up to him, he looked at me, and George, I kid you not, he had no eyes, no mouth, and no nostrils. There was no orifice on his face. He was pale white, no hair, no features whatsoever. It looked like a skeleton with bleached white skin. He was just kind of standing there, looking right at me. I slowed down, and as soon as I saw his face, he looked up at me, and boy, I flipped the hammer down all the way to Chicago. I never looked back. My blood ran cold. My hair stood up. It was one of the most disturbing things I have ever seen in my life." Another such account was reported on Reddit by a witness who says his frightening encounter happened on Christmas night of 2007 at a lakeside community in rural upstate New York. The festivities had worn down, and at around 8 p.m., the witness took off in his car to a friend's house. The place was only about a 10-minute drive away, and the night was clear, so there would have been no reason to suspect that anything would happen in such a quiet and peaceful place. But things would quickly take a turn into the weird. He had this to say: "As I drove, I noticed what looked like someone walking up ahead on the opposite side of the road, coming in my direction. Mind you, I was going about 20 miles per hour the whole time, so it was probably less than a minute by the time the walker came into clear view. I got a quick scan of it from the windshield before my car and it were exactly parallel. It was not a person. It stood on two long legs, with long arms hanging down from its shoulders. It was strong-looking, lean, muscular, but not beefy in stature. It looked thin at the same time. It stood at least 7 feet tall. It was light-colored, not sure whether it was white, tan, yellow, or grayish. It didn't appear to have fur, but there was some texture to the skin. It wasn't smooth. There appeared to be something coming off of its back. I don't know what this was. All I can recall about its face is the small features it had, but the mouth and jaw were notably large, and it had pointed things atop its head. Two things going straight upward, with something mingled between the two things. That's what I got from a quick scan, and from my observation of it, as it neared my car, and my car neared it. As my car became parallel to it, within a split second, I went from looking out of my windshield to looking at it from my driver's side window. In that moment, its face quickly peered down at me, and all I remember was the mouth opening wide. Out came a remarkable scream that I'll never forget. It gives me the chills just thinking about it. It consisted of a high-pitched, shrill shriek, enveloped by a deep guttural growl. Both sounds happened simultaneously in that scream. I kept driving all the while. This was all happening so fast that I didn't even have a chance to be scared or shocked or anything. I continued driving and went past my friend's house and drove home. I called him to tell him what had happened and that I just needed to get back. I was probably running on adrenaline to get back home. Later on, I was in total shock after it sunk in. Had my driver's side window been fully opened, it would have touched me, or worse, taken me. I'm certain of it. Another Reddit poster relates an experience his grandfather had at his rural home in a coal mining town in southeastern Ohio. The grandfather began to get visitations at night from a very otherworldly, tall, pale being that seemed to just loiter about the property and watch the house. And the commenter says this regarding his grandfather and his brush with the weird. He used to be soft-spoken and generally reserved, but the last time I visited him, he was easily startled by noises, constantly checking outside the window, and he won't let his dog outside unless he goes with the dog, and he always brings his handgun with him. I asked him why he's so jumpy, and he told me that it was because of something he has seen multiple times outside his kitchen window. He claims that he has seen a tall, white, and very thin creature on the edge of his backyard, near the tree line. He tells me that it has small black eyes, that it's around 8 feet tall, and that it just stands there watching his house, and then vanishes. He said the sighting started about 2 months ago, and I've only seen him twice since he started to see whatever this thing is. I'm at a loss for words on how to help him. My grandfather used to be so easygoing, but anymore, he's afraid of my family staying at his house past sundown, because he doesn't want us seeing it either. Another case is given by a Reddit user on a post titled, "White Creature in the Woods of Pennsylvania." The witness says that he was driving his aunt to the airport at around 1 a.m. in a rural area outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and the road is described as having been very dark and a little foggy that night. Then they came across something they could not explain, of which the witness says this. It was facing toward a telephone pole off to the right side of the car. The pole was just in front of a garage or a small barn structure. All I could see was the back of its head, completely white, no hair, and its hands and its forearms were also totally white. It looked like it was wearing a dark shirt or something of that nature, but it was facing away from us, leaning into the telephone pole with its arms up against the pole, and its head against its arms, or at least a stance similar to that. The worst feeling I have ever felt rose up in my chest when I saw it. I felt my heart almost stop and drop into my stomach. I felt sick and terrified. All I knew was that whatever it was, I did not want it to turn around. No matter what, I knew it couldn't be allowed to turn around, or I would regret it. I've seen a lot of really weird things in my life, and felt a lot of really weird sensations. I've always been super sensitive to the energy in homes, and I have straight up seen ghosts in my parents' home, one of which I am very wary of. But this was actually terrifying. I cannot explain the immense feeling of dread and horror I experienced in that moment to you. You could only understand it if you've experienced it yourself. This thing was tall, and had distinct arms and legs. It had no hair whatsoever on its body. I don't know if it had facial features because it was faced towards the pole, almost like it was counting for hide-and-go-seek with its arms up. It might have been hugging onto the pole. It wore something black. I experienced the worst and most deeply jolting fear in its presence, and I was only near it for a few seconds. In yet another report, we have a Reddit user who also saw something very unsettling by the side of the road while driving with his fiancée through a remote road in an undisclosed location. He says this: I live in a Rust Belt state about an hour south of our state capital, in a rural, hilly area. Me and my fiancé were driving from my parents' house to a friend's for a bit of night swimming. Our way there passes a state park's boundaries, and about 5 miles from any house on the road, we saw what looked to be a pale-skinned humanoid crouching on the side of the road. From behind, you could see that the spine of this creature was poking out of its back, and it almost looked as if it was hunched over roadkill. I could see it turn its head in our direction as we passed it, but I didn't get a good look at its face. Before seeing that, me and my fiancé were very skeptical of the paranormal. Again from the state of Illinois, we have a report from Rake, with a witness who was driving on his way home from a friend's house in rural Illinois, in an area with many creeks and woods. His girlfriend was with him at the time, going home herself in a separate car, but later on she would call him in a state of frantic panic, and would give a very strange tale. The bizarre story goes as follows. On Friday night, she and I were at a friend's house, and decided to leave around 1 a.m. It was very foggy outside, being that we live near rivers and creeks in rural Illinois. She goes to the gas station on her way home to the rural town where we both live, about a block away from each other. I get home and don't hear from her for a bit until she calls me, very shaken up and crying. She says that on her drive home she saw something crouched in the road on the right side. It looked to be fairly small, possibly a child. She rolled her window down and asked if they were okay, and got no answer, only continued sobbing. She pulls over and gets out of the car and walked up to whatever this was, and attempted to ask it if it needed any help. The thing then stands up on 2 feet at over 6 feet tall, pale and hairless, and lets out a god-awful screech, and runs off the road into some pretty dense woods near a tributary of the Kaskaskia River. She can't say if it was a boy or a girl, but she can say she's never heard something like that before. She's pretty jarred by the experience. As frightening as these reports may be, perhaps even scarier still, are those reports of pale humanoids or pale crawlers, right within the confines of one's home, and there are a few very disturbing cases along these lines. One witness who was at the time staying with her parents at their home in Texas says that one day she was just taking a nap on a futon in the middle of the day, and that at one point she opened her eyes to see that she wasn't alone. She says this: As I opened my eyes, I saw, for only a second, the image of some white humanoid creature kneeling on its haunches, looking at me. It couldn't have been that tall, since its eyes were only inches above my head. I could see the top of its knees, which it was resting its head against. While I can't remember many details about its face, I knew, somehow, that it wasn't entirely right, for lack of a better term. I can't remember if it had any hair on its head, or the color of its eyes, but I can remember that its skin was very pale, and it looked as if it were just skin and bones. I do not know why the image of this creature was so vivid, even though I only saw it for a second, but even to this day, it stands out. Another account was given by a witness who also saw something incredibly odd in his home when he was just 14 years old. At the time, it was around 10 p.m. at night, and the witness had gone to sleep on the sofa in the living room. As he laid down to try to sleep, he then heard a scrambling, scratching sound that kept him awake, and which was odd, because the family did not own any pets, and everyone else was in their rooms. The witness describes the creepy ordeal that would follow. So I'm lying down, and as soon as I close my eyes, I hear something crawling on the shaggy carpet, like it was crawling fast in circles. I could hear it loud and clear. I stayed frozen, thinking, what the hell? The crawling sounded as if it was scraping itself against the carpet while moving. I hear it coming closer to me, next to the couch, and it goes back off to the same spot where the sound started, which was like 5 feet away from the couch, in this empty space in the corner of the living room. Curious, I take a small peek, and as I can remember, it looked like a human crawling on all fours, except the body was backwards, like if you lie down facing up, and then arch your back up with your hands and legs, and it had dark pale skin, and I didn't see a head, only its legs and hands. It wasn't wearing anything. It was dark from my view, so I didn't see its entire body. At that time, I never ever played any scary games, and now that I'm older, I can only say that the creature looked like something out of a Silent Hill game, like the skin texture. I know that I wasn't asleep yet, because I barely got on the couch when I jumped up. I was still wide awake. I wasn't sleepy at all. I know it wasn't a dream. So what are these things? Ghouls? Aliens? Mutated science experiments, perhaps? Or maybe something much, much worse? Whatever they are, it would seem that we once again need to create a whole new category for this horrifying entity. But what do you think? If any of you have seen this creature, I would love to hear about your encounter. If you've witnessed something unexplainable and you'd like to have your story shared on the podcast, please contact me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com or visit paranormalmysteriespodcast.com and click on the Tell Your Story link. All of our contact information can be found in the show notes. From all of us at the Paranormal Mysteries Podcast, thank you for listening, and remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.